Hi, my name is Damon Lembi, and I'm the CEO of Learnit. I hope you enjoy your Influencing Without Authority class. And if you do, please like and subscribe to my channel. Enjoy your class.
Hello, welcome to Influence Without Authority. My name is Joe Little, Professional Development Facilitator here at Learnit, and it's my pleasure to walk you through this journey. This is a course that is for anybody, especially people who don't have the positional authority to get things done, but still need to get things done. Maybe you're a project manager, or you're an individual contributor, and you need to be able to work and collaborate laterally where the structures don't give you any way formally to give you what you want. So how do you do it? Well, thousands of workers around the world in many different industries have figured out that as companies have gotten flatter and as they've gotten more global, we are working across borders, across time zones, across continents, and there is no clear way to get what you want. What do you do in those cases? We have to rely on influence, hence the name Influence Without Authority. If that's your case, you're in the right place, because at the end of the workshop, you'll have some tools and some practices that you can apply that are going to help increase your influence and be able to collaborate in those moments when you most need it. You should know that this is a self-paced workshop, which means that you can pause the video, and I recommend that you do. Pause the video every so often. Use that time to go backwards and review your notes, or re-listen to a portion of the video that you may not have fully captured the first time. You'll find you'll get a lot more value out of it like that. Walk it at your own pace, take as all the notes that you need, and then keep on going. In a moment, I'll walk you through what we're going to be covering in our session today. First, we're going to learn to apply a 4-step process to influencing others. I'll describe each of the stages in turn, as well as some practices that you can adopt to make this happen. We'll also discover how to build a foundation that influences other people, as well as ways that you can communicate your objective using a balance of logic and emotion. And as a final step, we'll learn how to properly time our request to make it more likely that we get a yes. So if you're ready to do that, then keep on watching and we're going to get to it. I'll see you in a bit. Let's get into it. Influencing without authority. 2 of those 3 words appear on the screen in front of you. What are the differences and why do they matter? Well, first of all, influencing is a skill. It's a practice. It's something that we're not born with, but it's something we can definitely improve. Hence the purpose of this course. It's the ability to have an effect on the ideas and on the actions of other people. There's a good chance that you have already influenced people around you without even knowing it. If somebody has ever adopted your idea, or acted on your suggestion, or emulated you in some way, even though you couldn't compel them to do it, you have influenced them. This is something that takes repeated practice, but it also takes knowing how to do it and having a system to do it. And that's something that the course sets out to do. This is different from the related idea of authority. Authority is something that you have. It's something that comes with your role. It's part and parcel of who you are in the organization. For example, if you're a manager, you're a leader, you're an executive, the authority is built into your role, and you can get compliance from people. You don't need influence. But now comes the question, which is more desirable? If you have no authority, influence is your best bet to get things done. It leads to a more collaborative and positive working environment because the people around you are acting out of choice. They're collaborating out of their own free will because they've been influenced positively. Is it desirable to have authority without influence? There are many despots out there, many leaders that use only their power and none of their charm. And what do they get? They get obedience. They get short-term compliance. They don't win the hearts and the minds of people. All they do is ensure that people will do the minimum not to get in trouble. Now, if you are somebody that does not have positional power in your company, but you would like to be able to get things done, influencing is going to be your best bet. So what does it look like? And how is it different from a top-down request? On the slide in front of you, you see 3 examples on the left side of what a lateral request may be. In other words, a request that you hope your influence would be able to get you towards. On the right side, you have the same 3 examples, but worded differently. The reason they're worded differently is because now they're coming from somebody who does have positional power, and they can compel an outcome or force a result. If you need a moment to read the examples, pause the video, have a careful look at them. This might help you to decipher how does something sound when it's coming from a place of influence, lateral request, versus authority and top-down. And see what you can glean from this. After you've read the examples and you've had a chance to reflect on this a little bit, I would invite you to pause the video and think back to your own efforts at influencing people. I can just about guarantee that if you're watching this video right now and taking this course, you have already tried to influence people, and you did it the best way that you knew how. Well, how did you do it? Pause the video, think about what worked and what didn't. After that's done, after you've written that down, come on back, because I'd like to walk you through what is going to be the crux of the course, and that is our 4-step process to getting more influence. I'll see you back in a bit. Now that you've been exposed to the concepts of influence and authority, we've seen examples and why they matter, now we're ready to go on to the 4-step process for building influence. What you see on the screen from left to right are those 4 steps. Beginning with step 1, building relationships. That's the step we're going to cover first. Second, knowing what your objective is, and then understanding the audience to whom you're going to be trying to get some kind of a request. The 4th step is finally communicating your objective. In this course, we're going to go through each of these in turn, starting with building the relationship. This one has particular emphasis because you might think of it as a pre-work step. Perhaps it was not a new idea to you that in order to influence people, we have to have some kind of a relationship with them. I can't influence somebody that I don't know at all and have no relationship with. Relationship building is something that I have to cultivate. It's something that I have to give careful attention to. It may not be natural to you. It may be an area that you struggle with or have struggled with in the past. The good news is that there are 3 areas that I'm going to cover in a moment that can help to focus your efforts in relationship building. And I'm going to cover these on this next slide. What you're looking at now on the screen are some questions, but they act as a checklist for how well you're doing at building relationships in these areas. Think of this again as the pre-work, the precursor to influence. From left to right, you might think about how do you develop real and meaningful relationships? Secondly, how do you establish your trust and your credibility? And third, how do you get people to like you? These 3 areas, these 3 important facets of relationship building, we're going to cover in turn, and we're going to look at some examples that can help you build in each of these 3 areas. Pause the video throughout as you need. And after we've covered all 3 sections of relationship building, I will invite you to consider how you build relationships, how you've done it in the past, what has worked, what hasn't, and where you can go from there. Let's first look at how do we build real, meaningful relationships. Very often, we think that we're influencing an outcome or we're influencing a decision. And while that is in some ways true, what we're really doing is influencing the person. And that is going to raise the probabilities that we are more influential in that decision or in that matter. This may have been obvious to you, but the difference that I want to highlight here is the intention. The focus here is on building the relationship with the person. It's not to use the person. The difference comes out when we're building relationships. I don't want you to think of this as a means to an end, because somewhere along the way, we slip. And the last thing we want to do is show ourselves to be inauthentic and simply using people or manipulating them. That's not what this course is about, and we don't condone any of those practices. Instead, think about how you build actual, meaningful relationships with people professionally, but personally as well. Over on the right side of the slide, there are some examples of things that you can do that are going to help in cultivating these real relationships. The first one is finding commonalities. We tend to have relationships with people when we unearth commonalities because that springboards into more conversation. Perhaps around the office, you have found out just through organic conversation that somebody also has a pet, or they have children the same age as you do, or they share hobbies outside of work. That in of itself will not give you influence, but it does give you a gateway to further conversation. Good conversation can make good relationships. The second and third points on that list are around empathetic listening and asking questions. People who are deficient in relationship building sometimes are that way because they like to talk more than they listen, and they're not interested and don't ask questions of other people. Don't do that. Being an empathetic listener allows for two things. One of them is that it makes the other person feel important, makes the other person feel interesting. But what that does for you, at least in the more short term, is that it reveals important information about why does the person think the way they think? Why do they feel the way they feel about certain issues? And why do they do what they do? That's important information if you're trying to influence somebody. But then there are things that you won't know, that will not be revealed that easily. Ask good questions. Ask questions and listen to the answers. These two things done together can really take the relationship building to the next level because people want to feel interesting and they want to feel heard. The fourth point is around having good EQ, emotional quotient, otherwise known as emotional intelligence, and having a low ego. These two things go hand in hand. And I'll give you an example to illustrate this. Imagine that you are a subject matter expert and a junior comes onto your team and they purport to have the same skills, but perhaps not as many years of experience. And there's a matter where the two of you disagree. How do you carry yourself? It may be very tempting to press your point, to argue your case, and when it's not sinking in, you may revert to your years of experience and your laurels to push your viewpoint through at the expense of your junior colleague. Is this a good idea? Well, on the one hand, you may be right. Your experience may prove that you were right about that issue. But the difference is in the way that you treat the person. Do they have a chance to air out their case? Are you genuinely open to considering a point of view you hadn't before, regardless of who it comes from? You see, this is a case where we're choosing between being right and making a potential ally. Make the right choice. Because use your emotional intelligence for good, and you might find that you're making more friends than you are enemies. The final point doesn't need any extra explanation. Be honest. It's the foundation on which relationships are built. Pause the video, re-listen to any of these portions if you'd like more detail. Otherwise, let's go on to the next part. At work, it isn't enough just to have relationship building. We have to be able to back it up with actual action and actual results. So this is the part where we are able to build and display our trust and credibility. It starts with consistency. Consistency means that we are consistent between our words of the past and our actions of the present. Think about what you've said, opinions that you've given, positions you've taken. Are you acting congruently with them? The more consistent you are, the more people around you are likely to believe you and believe that you'll be trustworthy in the future. The next three that you see on the screen are fairly self-evident. And you might think of these as things that are built into your performance evaluation. These are things that you have contractually taken on if you want to be held in good light at your company. Meeting deadlines, honoring responsibilities, delivering results. This seems basic. But every small deadline we miss, every small promise we break, is chipping away at our credibility. So early on, when we're trying to set a good example, it's worth remembering that we're being judged every little time this happens. Do those things. The last one has to do with our ability to contribute in the workplace. And that comes from our experience, our expertise, what we know of the business or of the industry. What we're not advocating here for is bragging or being arrogant or getting involved in conversations where we're not welcome. In fact, you don't have to be a loud person. You don't have to be an extrovert, even though those two things aren't the same. Here's an example. In a meeting, you may hear your colleagues discussing ideas about how to overcome a difficult problem. Perhaps you have experience from past job outside the company or maybe in a different unit that could come to bear. You could simply say, in my experience, I have seen this, this, and that. Or based on what I've learned, this could be helpful. Make your point. Make it confidently, because you do have something to offer. And be prepared to back that up. All these things in tandem can help you build trust and establish credibility with those who you seek to influence. So now comes the final aspect of relationship building, and that is investing in likability. There are many people that I've known personally, as well as clients or acquaintances, who are of the mindset that if I'm at work, why do I need to be likable? I'm not here to make friends. I'm just here to make money and go home. That's fine. But if you think that way, you're leaving opportunities to influence on the table, because likability matters. Influence is about getting people to say yes. It's about getting people to walk in your direction. And we tend to say yes to people that we like. These things go hand in hand. So assuming that you accept that and you'd like to build your likability, here are some things that you can do. Start with compliments. Nobody is too busy to hear a compliment. If somebody went above and beyond, mention that. If somebody exceeded their numbers or their quotas, mention it. The key with compliments is that they be genuine. If you genuinely don't like something or you feel it's below your expectations, say nothing. That may be the best course of action. If you have nothing good to say, don't say anything. If you do, say it genuinely and say it sparingly, because somebody who goes around giving compliments to everybody for everything ends up cheapening the compliment. So do pay it forward, but be careful where and how you do it. Second thing is to cooperate on mutual goals. Let me give you an example. Suppose that you and the leader of another department are working on two different aspects of a project, and neither of you can move forward until both of you have completed a phase. What if you finish first? What if you have resources to spare? Are you going to help the other person? You have no obligation to do it. But the fact that you take interest in the other person's goals and you reaffirm your shared goal of moving along and getting all the different dependent parts working together will help. Will this make you more likable? Of course it will. Everybody likes someone who is willing to cooperate with them. The third one helps in the beginning, even though its usefulness later on ends up getting reduced, and that's the law of reciprocity. Decades of social psychology research have told us that when we do something good for somebody, they feel a strong desire to reciprocate, hence the law of reciprocity. Try that out. I'm sure that you've seen this at work every single day of your life. Be the one who gives first before you expect to receive. If I'm trying to build influence with a colleague, early on, before that person and myself know each other, these kinds of favors, this tit for tat, this I give and then you feel like giving, that helps early on. But once we've established each other to be trustworthy, this sort of transactional reciprocity is less necessary to sustain the relationship. But it is a very powerful lever early on. The final one is a bit more unique, and that is leveraging something that's called the Ben Franklin effect. What this is, a discovery was made long ago by Benjamin Franklin himself that if you want to gain a friend or an ally, ask them to help you. Now, this may seem weird at first, given that we just said give first, as per the law of reciprocity. What does this mean? Well, everybody likes to share their expertise. Everybody wants to be recognized for what they know and the value they could offer. Now that we understand that, think about somebody at work who prides themselves on their knowledge or on their unique experience in a certain field. Now, maybe what they have is not central to what you need in this moment, but that chance to have them educate you or fill you in or help you see another side may be just what it takes for them to change their mind about you, especially if their first impression of you was either mildly negative or simply indifferent. Try that out. Ask people for their advice. Ask people for their help and expertise. and you may find that you gain allies. All of these things help us paint ourselves in a more likable light to other people. The key to this is to be genuine and to not overpromise or flatter or do anything of the kind. Now that we've seen the 3 facets of relationship building, I'd like you to pause the video. Think about which ones have you already been doing. Write those down. Also, write down which ones you would like to do. Consider writing down 3 goals that you have for the near term. Things, actions, new ways of being that could help increase the power of the relationships that you build. Take your time in doing that, and when we come back, we're going to look at the second step in this influence process. By now, we've seen the first step. What does it take to build good relationships at work? You've also had a chance to pause and reflect on the way that you've been doing things and what are some things that you could do in the future. Now where we're getting to are the middle steps. Step 2 is knowing your objective. What are you asking for? What is your request? And finally, who is it going to? Step 3. When it comes to knowing your objective, what do you want? Are you asking for another set of eyes to go over a proposal? Are you asking for somebody to make an exception to a protocol to allow you to speed up your work? What is that thing that you want? When doing this, we want to be prepared to reason it out. Social psychology research studies have shown that when we use the word because, when we attach a reason to the request that we make, you're more likely to get a yes. Think about what you're asking for and also what is the reason that somebody else would reasonably agree with you. Make sure that that's present. And lastly, have your data ready. To some, this may not be that important. But when it comes to knowing our objective, we have to be ready to back it up and help the person to help us so that there's less of that back and forth. These are important things to consider when knowing our objective. Now that we have our objective set, now we have to tailor it to the right audience. That's step 3, knowing the audience. To get this right, we want to use our skills of empathy and perspective taking, which we learned at the relationship phase, to understand the person and their world. Well, what does this mean? Well, what's important to them? What do they care about? What challenges are they facing? What are their key performance indicators or their KPIs? Try to better understand the world in which they work. Don't assume that their personal objectives are always the same as the stated mission or the company's objectives. Try to really understand what moves them. How are they evaluated? What's important to them? Secondly, make that same assessment for yourself. This should be a lot easier to do. And finally, look for overlap. This is easy to say. It's easy to read on the screen, but what does it look like in practice? Let me give you an example from my very own practice. I had a client one time, a product manager, who also had experience with engineering, and he was trying to influence a team of engineers who, in his estimation, were making mistakes and weren't seeing the right way to do things. Thing was, he was in a new role where the value he brought was not telling the engineers what to do, but it was about relaying the important customer needs, the end user's needs and experience to the engineering team. There was friction between them. Neither one had positional power over the other. The engineers wanted to have their autonomy respected, yet at the same time, they wanted to have important input for making sure that the product met spec and that it delivered on the customer promises. This particular individual, the product manager, wanted to make sure not just that the engineering was done, but also that the product was satisfying people. And it was by turning the focus of the conversation away from whose job is what and who's overstepping their boundaries. Once they moved away from that conversation, they both focused on their desire to have a good, sleek, working product they could put out to market. The engineers also, to their credit, found out that by appealing to the product manager's sense of value, in other words, he alone could bring in the customer perspective to the equation, that made him feel validated, which he wasn't getting before. So in this example, simply by shifting the conversation away, there could be much better results. And it turns out that both parties mutually influenced each other for the better. So think about, who is your audience? Who do you want to influence? Now that we've seen this, pause the video and make some notes for yourself. Reflect on who is this person or people that you're trying to influence. What's important to them? What's important to you? And where is the overlap? By doing this important work, that'll set us up for the fourth and final step in our influence process. We've finally arrived at the fourth and final step of the influence process, and that is communicating our objective to the person or persons that we seek to influence. You might think of this step as being the part where we finally execute on all of the work we've done previously. Let's go see how that happens. When it comes to communicating the objective, first of all, we want to be explicit and concrete. Ask with confidence. So think about how somebody who is confident will sound. How will they look? Where will they look? How will they hold their body? How will they craft their sentences and express themselves? We don't need to tell great big long stories to try to convey our point. In fact, the shorter and the crisper our questions and requests, the better off we'll be. We'll talk a little bit more about communication styles up ahead, but suffice to say for now that the easier it is to understand the request, the more likely it is to get a yes. You may have heard of the acronym WIFM. What's in it for me? This is important. The earlier you can establish for your listener, for the person that you seek to influence, what's in it for them to go along with you, the more that increases your appeal. The fourth thing is to communicate outcomes rather than actions alone. You see, if I ask somebody to take my place running the meeting on Thursday by saying, hey, can you run the meeting on Thursday? I'm making a direct request to them, but I'm not giving them really any way to see beyond that. Whereas if I explain myself, I give my reason, I say, look, right now I'm onboarding somebody who just came on the team. This is somebody who can add a lot of value to us. I'm looking for your help on Thursday. Would you be able to run that meeting? Because that'll free me up to get this person up to speed. In that second example, I have communicated not just the simple request, but also the bigger context in which it sits. The reason, but also the overall goal for trying to excuse myself from my current obligation of running Thursday's meeting. That will give the other person more agency, more say-so in the decision, and they'll be able to make a better informed choice if they want to go along with me. Finally, the language that we use is important. When we're talking about team efforts and we're trying to appeal to that sense of collective, use we language. So we, our, instead of me, my, and I. The more that we can appeal to that plurality, the better off we'll be. These are some tips that will help you generally at communicating the objective. But I want to make sure that we don't forget this important point, that there is no single one way to influence everybody all the time. And coming up ahead, we're going to explore what accounts for some of the differences. So why is it the case then that what works for one person is not going to work for another? Well, if you've ever taken training on communication styles, you might be aware of the fact that people communicate differently. For example, some people are very task-focused in their communication. They use language to reach an outcome. They want to see if you got the email. They want to know the status of the project. This is task-focused communication. It's done with a purpose, and it tends to be transactional. Once the person gets what they need and there's the exchange of information, the contact is over. Whereas there are other communicators that are more relational in their focus. So they use language to learn about the other person, to exchange ideas and perspectives and feelings sometimes. These are relational communicators. Some people are a certain blend of both. Now, depending on how your audience communicates, that's going to influence how you choose to execute your message. Another thing that we should consider is the relationship you have to the person you're trying to influence. It's, of course, a lot easier to influence somebody that is already within your circle of influence, as in you have a history with them, ideally a positive one. You already know something about them and they about you. That is a lot easier to do than to try to influence somebody who's simply a name on an org chart somewhere. So considering the distance you are to the person, as in the relationship, and their communication style, these are things that can help you take into account how to tailor your communication. So by now you've gathered that it's important to deliver the message in the right way. So what is the balance? And what does this balance mean for the way that we position our ask? The model you're seeing in front of you is the push and the pull method. And this is something that Dr. Tim Baker, leadership and executive coach, author of the New Influencing Toolkit, had crafted. And what it says is this, that when we're using a push approach to influence, this means that you're trying to persuade, you're trying to use reason and logic to make your points. You're hoping to appeal to the other person's sense of reason and logic. Whereas at the other extreme, you're trying to use emotion and you're trying to tap into some of those more intangible things. You might call it the heartstrings, even though I personally don't like that term. Now that you've seen what the model is and how these are opposites to each other, consider this example. If I come up to you and say, I need you to post on our social media accounts daily to promote our brand, that's going to be a push approach. If I say, we need to increase our presence on these social media platforms, what would you think about posting once a day? We're communicating the same message, we're just using different ways to do it. One's a push approach, the other one is a pull approach. So in practice, we want to find the right balance and we want to apply the right approach to the right situation. I hope that this is resonating for you. And I hope that my explanation, my examples, have gotten you thinking, where do you fall on this spectrum? Which one of these do you tend to lean more towards? You see, in the example I gave earlier, when you're trying to push something with reason and with logic, you're going to be more on the right side of the spectrum. When you're using an appeal to emotion, or when you're trying to appeal to somebody's sense of importance or value, as I did in the prior example, by asking the person, hey, what do you think if we were to do this in a more indirect way? Then you're using the pull, which is more on the left side. All of us have our go-to style. It may not be at the extremes. What is the go-to style for you? Prior to arriving in this workshop, before ever hearing about push and pull, now that you know this, where do you think your natural approach to influence lies? Pause the video if you have to. Take a few notes and come back with your reflections. Now that you've made some reflections, when would be a good idea to use a push approach? When would be a good idea to use more of a pull approach? Well, as we know, the push approach is more about, in a forward, direct way, stating the reasons. So here are some examples that can help. On the right side of the screen, you're seeing examples for when would the push approach be more appropriate. When there's one solution that's being discussed, or when you have a matter that's time sensitive and we need to reach a decision quickly. So you can see by the stated example there. Pause the video and read it to yourself so you can hear how it sounds. Over on the left side, you've got the pull. So when would the pull approach be right? Well, if there's several possible outcomes here, or where you don't have a time emergency, in situations like that, you may be more inclined to ask the question and then invite some kind of a reaction, as the example on the left side of the screen would show. You might also consider that whenever you are talking to people who are willing and capable of problem solving with you, collaborating, and using their critical thinking skills. Because again, we're not handing them the answer, we're not handing them the request, we're proposing something when we're inviting a reaction. That's what the pull approach is doing. So in your practical case, you may not find that all of the criteria are present. But now you know what to expect at the extremes. So use your judgment when it comes to using the pull or the push approach. And since you're native to one of these areas, maybe one more so than the other, this may require you to flex a little bit more and act differently from your usual style. What you're looking at on the screen here are 4 different methods to influence. And what they do is they balance the push and pull approaches that we heard about, as well as mixing ingredients of logic and emotion. What we're not saying is pick one of these strategies and get really, really good at it and do this one all the time. That's not what we're saying. Be aware of the different blends and also how they might sound. Because as you can see, there are written examples for all 4 of them on the screen. And then use that and apply this method to whatever situation you have in front of you. So what I'm going to do is begin at the upper left-hand corner and move clockwise through the quadrants so you can get a sense of how these differ and what they are in relation to each other. The first one is persuading. So how do you persuade? Use reasons. Use rationale and reasoning to make your point. You might hear things like, I suggest, I recommend, I propose. These are all persuasion appeals. They're not forceful, but they're still using logic. And then it requires the other side to buy into those reasons. Let's look at asserting. Asserting is also dependent on logic, but it might come off as a little bit more heavy-handed. You might hear things like, I need, I expect, I want. So we're expressing with more firmness, with more enthusiasm perhaps, what it is that you're looking to get. Now if we move to the bottom right-hand quadrant, we're looking at energizing. This is going to be more of an appeal to emotion, of excitement and passion to motivate others. We're tapping into their beliefs and what they hold dear. I believe, together, imagine, we can. This is much more of a story-based appeal. And the last one is going to be drawing. So I don't mean drawing like art drawing. What I mean by drawing is drawing out. So here you're leaning on your rapport and agreement. You're making incremental yeses turn into one much bigger yes. What do you think about? How would you feel if? What would you say if? Again, this is like the earlier examples of push and pull. There's almost a certain deference there. We're inviting the other person to give us their perspective, as in we're drawing out their position. Pause the video, look at all four again. Read the examples out to yourself. Do you see yourself in one of these? Are you currently facing an influence challenge? And you might have to move to one that you wouldn't have considered. Pause the video, write down some reflections that you may have on this. Now that we've got it all put together, let's go see what that is. Once again, using the spectrum that we presented earlier, now you can see where the four styles all fit in relation to each other. Some of them are going to borrow more from the forward approach of reasons, of logic, of stating desires and wants, whereas the other one is going to be more of an indirect approach using more soft appeals towards emotion and vision and enthusiasm. So you can see them laid out on the screen here. So this helps cement the idea that it's not simply picking one and going with it all the time. In fact, the most influential people are the ones that will recognize when situations differ and then be able to pick the strategy that they need. So these are all some tips that can help better communicate whatever request that you have, making it more likely that the words land and that your objective is met. If you have to pause the video and go back and look at some aspects of communicating your objective, do so as we prepare to look at a few other smaller considerations, yet important ones, about making sure that our influence attempts land the right way. Now that we've looked at the entire process, we do have a couple of small considerations to pay attention to. They're small in length, but they're still very important to watch out for. The first one is Kairos, which is the ancient Greek word for the right opportune moment. This has to do with the question of when do we make our influence attempt? Are we in the right time to do it? There are three questions that appear on the screen in front of you that could help you guide towards that decision. The first is the other person ready to hear? Perhaps they are visibly stressed, or you know that they're away. This may not be the time to rush communication and get a suboptimal result. Perhaps wait until they're ready and wait until you're ready. The next thing is weighing the risks of waiting too long. Sometimes we're waiting for the perfect moment to say just the right thing in just the right way. But some requests may be time sensitive, or somebody else might influence the other person first in a way that's not good for you. So think about that. Does it need to be done now? And was there a risk to waiting till later? Final one is this the right venue? So that has to do with the place in which we do it, or the means of communicating. For example, some messages are very nuanced, and they do require face-to-face contact, or at least audio contact on the phone or video conference. But if the message is more straightforward, you may consider typing it, either on email or on some instant communication channel. Also, does this message need to be delivered in private, or is it okay if others are in the room when you do it? These are all important considerations around the time and the place for delivering messages. Now here's why this is important. Because so far you've been working hard to build relationships, to understand the points of view, and tailor your approach to the right balance of logic and emotion. All of that's important work. But if we don't think about the time and the place in which we do it, our influence efforts may fall short. Now this next thing may be on your mind right now, and it may have been on your mind all throughout this workshop. And it's a fair and valid point. What if I face resistance? As in, what if the person that I'm trying to influence is resistant to my requests? What can we do? I should preface this by saying that in the art of influence, there are no guarantees. There is no guarantee 100% of the time that you will be able to influence that person to achieve this outcome. But as we've been saying, the tools and the tips and the practices in this workshop can greatly increase the chances that you'll be successful. So what happens if you have resistance? First thing to do is to reframe it. Reframe the resistance. You see, most people, when they attempt influence for the first time and they get resistance, they think that that's a categorical, permanent no, as in no to you. When in reality, it's an invitation to go back and figure out, what don't I yet know? Did I properly diagnose the other person's goals and interests? Did I articulate myself in the right way? Or is there something about their perspective I don't yet know? So what this does is it reframes the refusal, the rejection, into a call for curiosity. So use that opportunity, because you don't know what you don't know. We may learn more. The next thing is to stay flexible and open, because once we make the influence attempt, once we make the request, we make the ask, it's possible in the course of that conversation, the solution that ends up being worked out is different from the one you thought you'd have. Be okay with that, because we don't control other human beings, and we don't know where that conversation will go. And always, always, always listen, because when we listen, we get valuable information, and that can help us make decisions on the fly about where to go and how to do it. To summarize this, just remember that resistance when attempting to influence somebody may be normal. And the more you accept that, the easier it's going to be to deal with it when it finally does come. So putting this all together, I'd like to leave you with this. It nicely summarizes everything that we've been doing so far, but also it stresses the importance of making sure that we've got the right style to the right person for the right outcome. Pause the video, go back through the chapters, and you'll see how each distinct part of the course we've been putting our focus on the right style, finding out the right outcomes, and dealing it for the right people, as we covered it in the 4 steps. So as we're moving towards the end of the course, I'm going to provide you a wrap-up in just a moment. Congratulations, you've made it to the end of the workshop. In a moment, I'm going to summarize some of the key takeaways from our workshop and why they matter. The first one is build and manage strong relationships. I can't say this enough. Without relationships, there is no influence. The second thing has to do with finding the shared interests. We looked at knowing the objective and tailoring it for the right audience. So, build relationships is important, but if we're not speaking to the right person the right way, it's going to fall flat. Third takeaway is making sure we have the right balance of push and pull, logic and emotion in our appeal once we communicate this. Keeping in mind that there are other important considerations that we looked at most recently, like doing this at the right time and doing it in the right place. So putting this all together, if you implement the tools that you've learned, hopefully you'll be able to increase the chances to getting yeses when you most need them, being and feeling more influential in your world of work. But before you go, I would like to now invite you, seeing as you've now completed a class, to join our offsite learning community. That's offsitebylearnit.com. You are invited now to join a growing community of 7,000 professionals, people just like you, who've taken classes, taken an interest in one or more of our topics. Come join us and be connected to others that you can network with, thought leaders, instructors. So if you have interest in this topic or other ones, jump in, offsitebylearnit.com. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for taking this workshop. We hope to see you again sometime soon, and we hope that this has been valuable to you. Take care.